Hi, everybody. I think we have just about everybody here now. Thank you all for coming. My name is Rachel Nordstrom, and I'm very pleased to welcome you all here, hopefully from the comforts of your own homes, to our close-up look at the life, work, archive, and contemporary influences of Frankie Raffles. I manage the photographic collections at the University of St. Andrews Libraries and Museums, but also several years ago, I started the St. Andrews Photo Festival, which coincides with Photography Scotland's Seasons of Photography, both of which aim to highlight and celebrate the important and rich history of Scottish photography. And during our first festival, we did indeed show some of the work of Frankie Raffles as an important contributor to this story. This evening's event is brought to you by our kind host, Malcolm Dixon, and the fantastic team at Street Level Photo Works. Street Level is currently showing the work of Nikki Bird, and this talk is part of their series of events which reflect on women, found photography, and the latent histories which remain, or the influences on contemporary work. Nikki's show closes next week, so be sure to get in while you can, especially if you're in the Glasgow area. Tonight, we're going to delve into the work of Frankie Raffles, whose archive we proudly hold at the University of St. Andrews and is managed in partnership with Edinburgh Napier University. Frankie was a social documentary photographer capturing the world around her, but she also used the medium as a tool for change. In some ways, this change was directed at young photographers. She would teach through programs working with young people, particularly those with special needs. In other ways, she would use photography as a political tool to influence change and inform on issues of feminism, domestic violence, social injustice, and inequality. At this point, it's prudent to note that you should all be aware some of the content in the upcoming talks deals with sexual violence, abuse, and exploitation, which some of you might find upsetting. If you are affected by any of these issues we cover, Alicia will be sharing some information about where you can find help later during her talk. So tonight we're joined by Aleister Scott. Not only is he an associate professor of film and television at Edinburgh Napier and the director of the Centre for Media and Culture, but he was also a close personal friend of Frankie Raffles when their studies overlapped here at St. Andrews between 1973 and 76. And Aleister, I hope I'm not dating you too much by saying when you were at university. But he was also he's the mastermind behind the Frankie Raffles Archive website, and he was instrumental in building the partnership leading to the collection being held here at St. Andrews. Jenny Brownrigg is the exhibition director at the Glasgow School of Art, and in 2017, she curated the first exhibition of Frankie's work in over 25 years. This exhibition brought together several areas of work which had gone unseen for so long, but also opened up the collection to a whole new generation of visitors, introducing Frankie Raffles to a 21st century audience through the exhibition itself, but also an accompanying symposium and conference, and a publication. The influences of this exhibition and these events we're still seeing today, with many curators, students, and researchers reflecting on this exhibition with their ongoing work. Catherine Spencer, who also joins us tonight, was indeed one of those researchers who first saw Frankie's work at the GSA exhibition. She's a lecturer in the School of Art History at St. Andrews. She teaches, writes, and researches on the topics of activism, feminism, politics, communication, and photography. In fact, several of our students who studied and worked with this collection at St. Andrews, worked with the Frankie Raffles collection, during the course of their studies are joining us live here this evening through Facebook Live. I think tuning in from various places around the globe, so I hope that they're not staying up too late, but a special welcome to them as well. Finally, we have Alicia Bruce, who is a contemporary photographer, a teaching fellow at the University of Edinburgh, and founder of the Portobello Photography School. She will springboard on the themes we're addressing here tonight in the three preceding talks to her, and she'll tie it all together by looking at the inspirations she draws from Frankie's work, but particularly the ongoing work of Zero Tolerance, the Zero Tolerance campaign, which tackles domestic violence. Okay, so as I pass over to our first speaker, Aleister, who's going to start sharing his screen, I will just remind you that if there's any questions, they can come through the Facebook Live chat. I will feed them through to the speakers at the end with the help of some behind the scenes magic. As we are on a short delay here through Facebook Live, so you might have to bear with us right at the end, but we can deal with that when the time comes. So Aleister, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Can I just make sure that you are seeing my screen? That's the most important thing.
We are, thank you, yes.
You're seeing that. Thank you, Rachel. And thank you to Street Level Photo Works. It's great to be here this evening. Franki's career began around 1982 and lasted till her death in 1994, an incredible short 12-year period. Her work reflects the energy and variety of feminist and social documentary practice in the 1980s and 90s, a period when it was possible to work on political campaigns, community education, international projects, alongside having gallery exhibitions. Franki's creative practice reflects this mixed genre approach. However, because she died suddenly, aged just 39, for over 20 years, Franki's work remained largely forgotten. And that's really why I'm here. I'm not a photography researcher, as Rachel said. I teach film and television. I'm here because I was Franki's friend from when we met as students in the 1970s up until the time of her death. In the session, the others will look at Franki's legacy in close-up from several different perspectives. But first, it seems relevant to give an overview of Franki's practice and also the journey to rediscover her work 20 years after she died. A few years ago, I was appointed to the post at Edinburgh Napier where my remit included photography. And I was involved in discussions about restructuring our photography degree and became aware that despite the breadth and quality of work that I'd seen when she was still alive, Franki wasn't even a footnote in the histories of either late 20th century Scottish or feminist photography. And this didn't seem right. I remembered back to the mid-1970s and Franki urging me, then a history student, to read Sheila Rowbotham's book, Hidden from History. And I felt concerned that Franki's work and legacy might suffer the same fate as many women from previous centuries and disappear from view. So I contacted Franki's partner, Sandy, and discovered that her entire creative output had been carefully stored away, and that now Franki's family were keen to explore ways that her photographs might be seen more widely. The first step was to create a timeline and scope the range of her practice. Franki was best known for her work on Edinburgh's Zero Tolerance campaign, adopted by local authorities across the UK and abroad. The large-scale black and white images of women and girls in staged tableau were displayed on billboards across Edinburgh and other British cities. These positive images, which avoided presenting women as victims, were juxtaposed with short captions summarising stark, evidence-based research about the prevalence of male violence against women. It was the premature culmination of a career tragically cut short. Nevertheless, as well as this campaign, she left a substantial body of work in addition to Zero Tolerance. Franki was born in Salford in October 1955 into a well-respected and successful Jewish family. Her grandparents had all fled persecution in Eastern Europe at the start of the 20th century. Franki spent her childhood in London, and as a teenager, she visited the Soviet Union and Israel. In 1973, she took up a place to study philosophy at the University of St Andrews, and throughout her time as a student, she was active in the women's liberation movement. In 1978, she moved from Fife to Callanish on the Isle of Lewis to renovate a derelict farmhouse, and it was at this time she began to view photography as more than a hobby. There are portraits of neighbours and pictures documenting women working on traditional crafting activities. By 1983, Frankie had moved to live in Edinburgh, where she began to establish herself as a professional photographer. She gained freelance work with a range of social documentary projects. The work was often produced for low-budget publications and travelling exhibitions, but from the outset, she also made work for gallery exhibition. She was awarded a Kodak bursary to develop a project for Edinburgh special schools. Children and staff were introduced to working with Polaroid instant cameras. Her aim was to demonstrate how the quality of life for these children could be enhanced through the expression of their individual creativity with the camera. In a handbook entitled "We Can Take Pictures," Frankie wrote about her intention of using photography as a tool. She writes, "It provided the children with a channel of communication, a way of looking at the world and a way of challenging aspects of it." Frankie was always interested in international projects. In 1984, with her daughter Anna and partner Sandy, she set out on a journey across the Soviet Union to China, Tibet, and throughout Asia. The two women and 5-year-old Anna spent over a year traveling, and throughout the trip, Frankie developed her craft as a documentary photographer, street photography with a focus on images of women at work. Back in Scotland, she was commissioned to photograph the women athletes in the 1986 Edinburgh Commonwealth Games, and the resulting exhibition, Simply Women, toured libraries and sports centres. This led to a longer commission from Edinburgh Women's Committee to document local women's working lives. Frankie interviewed and photographed women at workplaces across the city of Edinburgh, capturing the diverse reality of Scottish women's lives at the height of Thatcherism. The result was To Let You Understand, an exhibition and book project. In 1988, Frankie was selected as one of 4 women for an exhibition entitled Picturing Women at Stills Gallery, Edinburgh. And in a development of her existing practice, she produced images of women working at Drummond Community High School, including teachers, but also dinner ladies and cleaners. And with this exhibition, she brought her committed photographic practice into the sphere of the gallery. Using ways of placing pictures together, she introduced complex political ideas about hierarchy in society. In the summer of 1979, with modest funding from the Scottish Arts Council, Frankie and Anna set off by car to undertake a project photographing working women in the Soviet Union. She spent 3 months in Russia, Georgia, and the Ukraine, documenting women's lives. In a tradition of women's photography which links her back to the photographers of the 20s and 30s, she captured the confident faces of Soviet women in the final months of the communist system. The resulting exhibition was shown in Glasgow as part of European City of Culture 1990, and also in Rostov-on-Don. At the start of the 1990s, as well as her deep involvement with zero tolerance, she began another international project entitled Lot's Wife, which was intended as both an ambitious book and exhibition project. The title comes from the poem by the Soviet modernist poet Anna Akhmatova, in which the writer reflects on the implications of the biblical story and the role of women. Frankie traveled to Israel to document the lives of Russian Jewish women who had emigrated there after the collapse of the Soviet Union and had been settled in transit camps in the occupied territories. The project, although almost fully completed, was never exhibited. To start the process of rediscovering Frankie's work, with Sandy's help, I worked through the numerous boxes of negatives and contact sheets. And with a small team of students helping, I began to digitize a selection of key images from the 11 projects we identified. This was the way I was able to bring the full range of work to Mark Boulay, then curator of the St Andrews University collection. And in 2015, the entire creative output of Franki's career was deposited by the family at the University Special Collections, negatives, prints, together with journals and personal notebooks. The next year, on International Women's Day in 2016, we launched the archive website, including video interviews that we'd carried out with people who'd worked on some of the projects, such as Evelyn Gillen, who worked very closely with Franki on Zero Tolerance. So it was now possible to examine the full range of Franki's work and the themes on which she focused. The role of women, inequality, identity, and migration. And from that starting point, it's been possible for lots of new projects to come into being. As with Jenny's curation of the exhibition that Jenny's going to go on to talk about. In the final months before Franki died, she was commissioned by the NHS to photograph hospitals and clinics. And the text that they used as part of the exhibition when they pulled these photographs together after she died, the text that they used, I think, really gives a good summary of Franki as a photographer. They wrote, Franki was a campaigning photographer. She wanted to make her work to make people think, not just about the picture in front of them, but about the wider world beyond the edges of the photograph. Thanks very much.
That was great. Thank you very much, Aleister. That's a perfect introduction to Franki and her work. And we're going to hand over to Jenny now. Jenny, if you can start sharing your screen. I should say we're going to roll from one talk to the other because all of these are, of course, beautifully organized and orchestrated. So they should be flowing together quite nicely. But Jenny has shared her screen there, so you can just start. Go ahead, Jenny. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. The exhibition Frankie Raffles Observing Women at Work was at the Reed Gallery, Glasgow School of Art from 11th of March to 27th of April in 2017. As Rachel mentioned, this was the first solo exhibition of Raffles' practice in 25 years following her death at the age of 39. Her practice had not been visible in the intervening period until her work, as we had heard, was accessioned to physical and digital archives. So the exhibition was an opportunity to draw knowledge on Raffles' methods and processes from the digital archive, as well as University of St Andrews Library Special Collections. Raffles' work, which again Aleister mentioned, had been missing from feminist art history discourse. The exhibition sought to make her particular contribution visible. Through conversations with Aleister Scott, his main aim for Raffles' work in the archives was that it be engaged with by curators and scholars and students in a multitude of readings, interpretations and exhibitions over the next years to come. Therefore, it was the ethos of the Reed Gallery exhibition not to be the definitive exhibition by any means, referencing all the 11 bodies of her work in a quasi-retrospective, for example, that would have meant that no one else could approach her work for a while. Rather, the exhibition ethos...
Jenny, sorry to interrupt you. Could you stop sharing your screen and start sharing again? Because we've got some gray blocks showing up on your screen. Sorry to interrupt you.
Not at all.
But as we are in a visual medium presentation, of course, we want to see all of the images. So hopefully, yeah, that's so much better. Great. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, as I mentioned, rather than showing all bodies of her work, the exhibition ethos was to focus on 3 bodies of work, looking at the theme of women in labour, considering how Raffles used her photography to communicate a message, and to begin to place her work in a historical and contemporary, and also in her contemporary context. It was also important to draw together a small publication that would, through Aleister's work, bring together key information, including a timeline for the first time, acting as a reference for others in the near future wishing to engage with her work. So the exhibition brought together 3 bodies of her work to let you understand, which showed 14 digitally scanned and printed photographs from a larger series that was part of her year-long project initiated by Edinburgh District Council Women's Committee, documenting women's lives in Edinburgh. Also Women at Work Russia, showing 34 digitally scanned and printed photographs from a larger series of her road trip to Russia just before perestroika, capturing Soviet women at work in both rural and urban places. And also with 3 posters, original artifacts and other related material from the first Zero Tolerance campaign entitled Prevalence. From a first assessment of existing archival material, I selected Raffles' 2 bodies of work referencing women at work, one in the Soviet Union and one in Scotland, in order to draw out her interest in political systems, using the exhibition layout to contrast those systems to imply what the photographer perceived to be the difference in condition for women workers. There's a palpable difference in the women workers, with the strength of the women working in the Soviet Union versus the more resigned area of the women workers in Edinburgh. Furthermore, this choice demonstrates the international scope of Raffles' work, which is unique to other feminist practitioners looking at this subject in the 1980s and 1990s. In terms of the exhibition schema, to represent the Soviet emphasis on the collective, Soviet women was shown across 2 walls as a non-linear hanging, ranging from rural to urban workplaces when reading from left to right, and to let you understand, was uniformly hung in a modest single line. I selected the 3rd body of work, Zero Tolerance, a graphic advertising campaign, to demonstrate that Raffles saw her work as having a function by communicating a message. This work showed Raffles using her photography in a campaign format. As part of my archival research for the exhibition, I reviewed material of Raffles' own documentation of the campaign in Edinburgh as it rolled across the billboards and sides of buses. This prompted the exhibition-making decision to print the Zero Tolerance logo to the scale of a billboard and paste it directly onto the wall. The presence of this large billboard-esque size paste-up undermined the sovereignty of framed photographic work in the gallery space, thus aligning with the photographer's aim for her work to communicate a message beyond being an art object. The inclusion of the graphic campaign and billboard-size Zero Tolerance image in the gallery also aimed to subvert the gallery white cube as principal holder of this exhibition, when Raffles made her work predominantly for a public domain. From the visit to St Andrews Archives, I used the formal aspects of Raffles' processes, such as her inclusion through captioning the dialogue with those that she was photographing, to become formal exhibition devices. Where possible, those captions appeared as vinyl lettering under the framed works in the exhibition. And this shows Raffles' aim to clearly give the women a voice, and also begins to draw out her ethnographic methodology in her work through inclusion of captioning the subjects. I also experimented with the scale of Raffles' works in order to visually test out what information could be gained from a variance in scale. This was because at the point of researching, there was no archival evidence of how Raffles displayed her work in galleries. There's only one comment in a visitor's book saying photographs by Raffles on display were too small and difficult to see. I wish to place her work within a wider context by showing examples of her work alongside 4 other historical and contemporary film photographers and collectives who also engaged with the theme of women in work. And the Reed Gallery was architecturally formed of 2 spaces which allowed for this formal shift. So here we see placing Raffles' work in wider context of women photographers in order to explore gender, women and labour. And this comparative methodology through exhibition making allowed for a revisionist process of placing Raffles' work in a wider set of histories. So here we see in the first pairing original photographs by Helen Muspratt from 1936 of Russian women workers in a field, and this was shown alongside Raffles' 1989 photograph of Soviet women workers in the field of a state farm. And a small display of materials relating to Muspratt's work show examples of how she had used her photographs for dissemination on her return to the UK. Here we have, again, like a composition that starts to show the difference between how photographers composed their shots. So we have Doris Ullman's close-ups of a series from the Appalachian Mountains in the 1920s and 30s, whilst we see that Raffles favours a mid-shot. This was an important pairing for me, which was pairing Raffles' work from Lewis alongside Margaret Fay Shaw's work from South Uist in 1934. And we can see a comparison of the composition where the woman is the central figure around the others who the group rotates. And here we have Raffles with the Hackney Flashers, her contemporaries, which starts to place the work within the time frame it was made in the 1980s, where women's collectives were also interrogating themes around women's labour. So to conclude, the Reed Gallery exhibition schema was aimed to confront the audience. Really, by entering the gallery, the viewer was immediately confronted by the volume of images of women in workplaces, and the exhibition goer's experience was to be surrounded by a society entirely comprising of women. And through this repetition of gender, each photograph included in the exhibition reinforces Raffles' own feminist agenda. So I'll finish there.
That was perfect and perfect timing. Wonderful. Right, we're going to hand over to Catherine next. Catherine, you can start sharing your screen. Thank you very much for that, Jenny. Really lovely to see that exhibition and see how it influenced many people moving on, including Catherine. So Catherine, you can, oh, I see you're doing it there. Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, great. Hopefully you can all hear and see me fine. I'll just keep going and stop unless someone tells me that you can't. Thank you so much, Rachel and Malcolm, for organising this event on Franki's work. It's such a great opportunity to continue a range of discussions that I feel very lucky to have been involved in over the past few years. I think it is highly telling that the work that I have done on Franki has been consistently collaborative, created through and creating in its wake a network of connections. And I'm hugely thankful to a number of people who I'd like to mention here for conversations, emails, and discussions about her practice, including Natalie Adamson, Alicia Bruce, Rachel Boyd, Jenny Brownrigg, Victoria Donovan, Lydia Healy, Anne Jackson, Jennifer Kerr, Wei-Tian Liu, Kirsten Lloyd, Sandy Lunan, Bianca Packham, Natasha Philomonas, Camilla Rostovic, Alex Rothney, Sean Rippington, Aleister Scott, Fran Stacey, and of course, Rachel. And I'm listing all those names, not just because I want to say thank you, but because I think that's a real testament to how Franki's work operates. It speaks really eloquently, both to her activist working processes, but also to the continued effects of her images. And I'm sharing one of my favorite photographs of hers, I think, from the Soviet Women series, which I think captures the communality that her images still have the power to generate. And so in the 10 minutes I have here, I just want to talk very briefly about the research and writing that I've been part of at St Andrews, and also to outline some of the ways in which this might continue to grow. So my first proper encounter, as Rachel has mentioned, with Raffles's photography came through Jenny's exhibition. So it's really wonderful to be speaking after Jenny now. And I knew that we had the archive at St Andrews, and in spring 2017, as part of an Art and Feminism Wikipedia editathon, Sean Rippington from our Library and Museums team had started Franki's Wikipedia page, which is now very pleasingly substantial. It's grown since. I have a long-standing interest in feminist performance art, but had only very recently at that point started teaching photographic history at St Andrews. And just before I saw the show at the Reed Gallery at GSOA, we'd started redesigning our MLit programme, as part of which I was putting together a team taught module on concepts of documentary for students on both our art history and history of photography tracks. And I distinctly remember leaving the show, clutching a copy of the catalogue on a very rainy and cold Glasgow day, but feeling so fired up and excited that there was this huge body of feminist work in special collections and being so eager to use it in teaching. And I think it's also a testament to that collectivity that Franki's work nurtures, that it's just been such a wonderful experience to use it in teaching. In November 2019, we held a study day on Franki's work at St Andrews, which brought together recent and ongoing research into her practice. And this was notably during a period when the archive was being catalogued and organisers, particularly by Wei Tian Liu, and increasing accessibility and the number of perspectives from which it might be approached and used as a resource. When I first looked at the archive, it wasn't catalogued, but now it's beautifully organised and very much ready to use. And as a result of this activity, I started to think more and more about Franki's work and began writing an article for a special issue of the journal Art History on the theme British Art and the Global, which is edited by Imogen Hart and Dorothy Price, which will be, I think, published next year or possibly the year after that, I'm not actually sure. The seed of this article is a booklet made by the Edinburgh District Council's Women Committee, summarising their activities between 1985 and 1990, which can be found in the archival collections that are also at St Andrews. And the cover of this booklet features one of Franki's photographs from the Soviet Union, showing a woman railway worker wielding a pickaxe above her head over a set of sleepers, which recede into the distance. And the image is one that very succinctly communicates both physical strength and a sense of autonomy and self-sufficiency. Following Jenny's show, I was already intrigued by the fact that Raffles had travelled to the Soviet Union, specifically Russia, Ukraine and Georgia in 1989, during a period when it was already in flux and beginning what would become a very rapid disintegration. And this booklet made me question the recognitions as well as the misrecognitions that might have been occurring at this point between Scotland and the Soviet Union. And I wanted to explore the extent to which Raffles's images might constitute a form of feminist solidarity, in the theorist Chandra Talpede Mohanty's understanding of this term as one which, unlike sisterhood, recognises rather than elides difference and takes into account the diversity of gendered experience, attuned to constructs of class, race, sexuality, nationality, and geographic positionality. Now, it's important not to deny the huge significance that the Soviet Union had for Franki and for her thinking, which was profoundly influenced by communism and Marxism. However, reading her journals and notes from her 1989 trip alongside her images reveals something more nuanced than a straightforward idealization of the Soviet system. So on the one hand, for example, Raffles's images of healthcare professionals in Russia, such as the one I'm showing here, might seem to celebrate the opportunities afforded women workers in the USSR. However, her notes reveal conversations with subjects in which they stress how badly paid and recognized this work was, in contrast to the so-called productive sphere of the factory. Franki's notes cue us into qualities of this image in particular. There's a stillness and a quietness to this image, which, while investing the workers with dignity and control, nonetheless contrasts quite strongly with the more dynamic and performative labor on production lines that she photographed elsewhere in this project. We can therefore, I think, read a critique of the way in which care work is valued into the framing of this image, and the slightly kind of suspended atmosphere that it creates. So the essay that I've been working on attempts to think about Raffles's work in relationship to the advent of globalization and the possibilities as well as the limitations of solidarity, particularly in projects formulated by a white woman photographer of Jewish heritage working from Scotland. The process of researching it has really underscored for me just how much Franki's work was interwoven with her activism. And this is an aspect of her practice that has been highlighted in recent conversations that I've been having with Rachel Boyd and Wei Tian Liu, who are working with myself and the curatorial team for an exhibition at Glasgow Women's Library, which is scheduled to open this August, entitled Life Support, Forms of Care in Art and Activism. And we're really delighted to be showing a small selection of Franki's photograph as part of this project. And we'll be focusing on her engagement with housing struggles and with health and with care systems. And we've been having some really interesting conversations about how attuned Franki was to some of the kind of liminal spaces of support and care, such as playgrounds, stairwells, which might be barriers, as well as spaces of support, or places that have been overlooked, such as in this contact sheet for the Green Dykes play area from To Let You Understand. We're also hoping to trace some of the connections between the archives at St Andrews and the Glasgow Women's Library collections, which we started to do before lockdown and are hoping to pick up on again soon. And these include overlaps between the GWL's collections relating to Harpies and Quines magazine and their Scottish Women's Aid collections. I'm just showing you very briefly on the slide, we've got a mock-up, a design rather, that Franki made as part of a Harpies and Quines campaign. They went with the very tongue-in-cheek tagline, not just for Dungaree clad dykes. And then we've got a newspaper article by Leslie Rideau from the GWL collections, together with an image of the final poster in situ in Glasgow, I think. So we're looking in particular at some of the work that Aleister mentioned in his presentation that Franki did for the Lothian Health Board, but also thinking about how this interest in health and in care and in social housing can be threaded through previous projects, notably To Let You Understand. So we're really interested in thinking about these support infrastructures of everyday life in Franki's work and showing them as part of this exhibition. And then finally, in September this year, a new PhD researcher will begin their studies at St Andrews as part of a PhD that we recently advertised on the theme Feminist Documentary Photography and Activist Networks, which will include engaging with the Franki Raffles Photographic Collection at St Andrews. With a provisional title of Feminism and Immigration, Documentary as Activism in the Work of Franki Raffles, Roisin Taponi's project promises to bring a new, vitally comparative and intersectional feminist lens to Raffles's work and that of a number of other photographers, and will mark the continuation and evolution of the conversations around her practice, which I feel privileged to have participated in over the last few years. And that's me.
Great. Thank you so much, Catherine. That's it's lovely to see the ongoing research that's happening with this archive, and thank you very much for mentioning all the people who have been involved with working with the collection, because even for me, who sort of tries to manage this, all the access and whatnot, it's great to have them in a big rundown list as you noted there. Okay, so we're going to hand over to Alicia. Alicia, if you want to start sharing your screen, you can take over and wrap us all up. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to start a timer on my phone so that I can keep time. And can everyone see my slides?
Yes, that's great. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much, and what an honour to follow all of these amazing talks. Thank you, Malcolm. Thank you, Rachel, for inviting me, and just, yeah, it's a privilege to talk after you all and show my small contribution to the amazing integrity work of Franki Raffles. I just wanted to start with a slide to say support is available if anyone's triggered by anything that's happening or being spoken about in these talks. The exhibition and the project that I worked on contains sexual violence, abuse, exploitation, which some people might find upsetting. And there's a list of helplines for anyone who lives in Scotland on the Zero Tolerance website, but anyone in the UK can contact Rape Crisis as well. And even if it's just talking about a feeling of being uncomfortable or anything, they're there to be impartial and to listen. So I believe Street Level are posting about that just now. So Also, thank you so much to Jenny Brownrigg, I should say. I wanted Jenny Brownrigg clutching at catalogues to be thanked, because she was a major contributor and gave amazing feedback on the Violence Unseen project. And also hello to Mary Walters, who gave me this. I don't know if you can see, I can't see myself. Frankie Raffles, An Appreciation, which was Frankie's obituary, and Mary kindly handed it to me on a Portobello Photography School workshop recently, and I was very moved. So I was a photographer on the Zero Tolerance Violence Unseen campaign, which is a photography exhibition to put unacknowledged and often unseen forms of violence against women on the map. It was launched in September 2018, which was 25 years after Frankie Raffles' iconic project that she did with Evelyn Gillen and Susan Hart and the Edinburgh District Council Women's Group. Always get it a bit wrong. And the legacy of Frankie is so important and so embedded in the Zero Tolerance Commission. The original campaign was groundbreaking in the Scottish Public Awareness Initiative in the 1990s, which challenged social attitudes, stereotypes, myths, using powerful images and slogans. The campaign was far-reaching across the rest of the UK. And taking this commission on, I won't read everything off the sheet, don't worry, was important for me personally and professionally as a working class Scottish woman, as a mother of a young daughter, and as a photographer and as a campaigner. A lot of my own practice is rooted in activism as well. And violence against women and girls is not a private domestic matter. People often think about violence against women as domestic abuse, but it's a human rights issue. Women are attacked verbally, physically, and professionally on all levels, in person and online, both directly and indirectly. Ending violence against women should be everyone's priority. Complacency on this issue is an endorsement. So it's not enough to just think it's bad now, we have to act. And I think we've seen this iconic image a few times, but the way that Frankie and Evelyn worked when they were working on the original campaign, that Z to me, it looks like you could pick it up and use it as self-defense, but the dignified tableau style portraits of women that Frankie made, these aren't feel sorry for these women type pictures. These are strong survivors. And I've actually met this woman, Sandra, and worked with her. She's fantastic. And I met her completely out of context at something else. And I was like, I just like this woman. I feel like I've met her before. And then when I told her about Zero Tolerance Project, she's like, oh yeah, I was in one of those posters. I was like, I've got that up in my office. So we had this amazing dialogue right away about that, what that meant. And in the poster, it says she lives with a successful businessman, a loving father, and respected member of the community. Last week, he hospitalised her. And that was Frankie's way of challenging class assumptions on violence against women. So at the time that they made this work, they were competing with things like Saatchi Gallery's campaigns, well, Saatchi and Saatchi's campaign, sorry, and the Wonder Bra adverts, Hello Boys, those kind of stark, contrasty adverts that were originally on billboards. They wanted to have the same impact, the same lure for the viewer to see the work and then get hit by the research, which is harrowing, and it's familiar to many women. And so I worked with a lot of partner organisations. In addition to Zero Tolerance, they had a list. This was with People First Scotland, which were women with physical and learning disabilities. Their strapline for their charity is anything that's not with us isn't for us. And that's part of how Frankie works, and certainly how I work. I see how I make work and photographs and campaigning, be it personal work for charities or anything, as collaborative. I'm a conduit for the stories of the people that I'm working with, or the way that they want to represent themselves. So I bring the technical skills and I bring some kind of ideas about symbolism, but ultimately I want people to be able to tell their part of the story rather than mine. It's not about me at all. And so I'm just going to talk about two pictures. I'm just checking on the time. Get to my photo 6 minutes in. This is Fatu Baldi, and she is, amazing, amazing woman. And I met Fatu through Shakti Women's Aid. I went to Shakti Women's Aid's training as part of the project, which was about working with women who had survived on honours-based violence and how police and teachers and things should recognise that and what to do. And Fatou, I wanted to talk to her for research, and she ended up saying that she wanted to be on one of the billboards or posters, and I was absolutely delighted. So this is a portrait of a woman who is well dressed, she's confident, she's sassy, she's a loving mother, and she's also a campaigner against female genital mutilation. She's such a great campaigner that she recently was awarded an MBE for the work she's doing in Gambia with women and girls. And when I met Fatou for the first time in Ocean Terminal in Edinburgh, Costa Coffee, here she is with her 3-month-old. She also had a 2-year-old at the time. She was a single mother in Edinburgh, living in a flat, had just completed her studies, was campaigning against FGM, which affects 137,000 women and girls in the UK every year. And we spoke really frankly to each other about our experiences and the collaborative process of making the work. And I just knew right away that we could make something together. So Fatou's flat, I wanted to show, you know, how warm and welcoming it was. And then she had this, this is very of its time in 2017, this poster, she believed she could, so she did, which she got from a very good friend while she was working on her campaigning. And her boys were so important to her. And she also wore a comrie shell necklace, which was really important symbolically. And there's a blog that I've written recently with Fatou, because I was asked to write about this image, but I felt like us in conversation was far more appropriate for representing these stories. But she's just awesome. Hi Fatou, if you're watching, I think you're great. And then my idea for the campaign, although it wasn't used, was to really echo what Frankie had done with using the original posters and the original text. I had this sort of, I imagined this timeline that we could have where, you know, the same sort of posters with the research could be used, and then 25 years later, someone else could pick up the project and do their own take on it based on the sort of intersectional feminism of 25 years from now, whatever that would be. I'm not doing maths just now. And all of the work that is presented, there's a publication which Street Level will post a link to as well, Violence Unseen, and the travelling exhibition was accompanied by research and text. And then I'm just going to talk quickly, a minute to go, about Mridul Wadhwa. I spoke to her about how I often use figurative paintings as a starting point for work. And she introduced me to this wonderful painting, The Lady with the Lamp, which is symbolic in India. Now, Mridul is, she is Indian, she is trans. She worked for Shakti's Women's Aid, working with women with no recourse to public funds to help them leave honour-based violence and honour-based marriages, and would often help with getting passports, with getting away, and the more sort of complicated nature of, you know, working with women in sort of religions and through through her culture. And she's wonderful. She's one of the calmest people I've ever met in my life. And she wanted to echo The Lady with the Lamp. So if you imagine, I know I'm going to go a little bit over time, but I hope that's okay and you'll forgive me. Thanks everyone for waiting. This is the sort of thing I do if I'm collaborating with people. I set up the camera and it's almost like setting a stage with life to come in, even if it's someone else's space or location. So the symbolism, semiotic signs, symbols within an image are important. So we've got the lady with the lamp, we've got the Shakti mat, the passports, the 2 passports, suitcases, toys. We have Mridul's adopted son here, and he brought through, because he collaborated too, the first family picture he drew after he'd been adopted. So it was like really, and the saris were really important as well. So it's really kind of trying to get over all of this symbolism and what matters and how that might reach an audience beyond a kind of white Scottish audience, you know, because we wanted this campaign to really reach out to all sorts of different women from all walks of life and cultures. So I really hope it did that. And again, here's just some of the symbolism and the setup in the room. It feels like I can smell the sort of the rice that she made for us in that room while I look at this. So exhibition started at Stills and went to lots of public spaces. My favourite was Shetland Airport, but it also went to bus stations, colleges, conferences, government buildings, and all sorts of things. And then this is my final slide. During lockdown, the Violence Unseen project, which is the 25 years of zero tolerance tribute, was reimagined about how it could look in public spaces. So you can also see that on Zero Tolerance's website. And I know I've missed so many things that I wanted to say here, but I wanted to just stop by saying, yes, Frankie was under-recognised. The first time I saw her work, I was in primary school when I saw the Zero Tolerance project. It helped me rethink things at a point where rape and marriage in Scotland had just become illegal in the early 90s. It's crazy to think it was that soon. But also I voted for Frankie as one of the Royal Photographic Society's 100 historic heroines, and she's on that list. So that feels like an achievement for me personally, and a tribute to someone who's fed into so much of what I do and the values. So thank you for listening. I'll stop sharing.
It was fantastic. Thank you so much, Alicia. And yeah, it's absolutely fine for you to run over the time, because that was really, it was a really important way to wrap up our talk. And it's really moving, our series of talks, sorry. It's really moving to see how Frankie's work still has such a clear and direct influence today, so many years after her death, but particularly with projects that she was so passionate about. And I think that's really, really quite, it says quite a lot about her and the work that she started, that it can still carry on today. So thank you for highlighting that, and also for your work bringing the attention of Frankie Raffles to the heroines, the RPS photographic heroines. That was great. It was wonderful
as well. I sent it to everyone. Please vote for Frankie.
I will invite, I think all of our speakers have turned their videos back on now. So we're going to open it up to Q&A to have our open up. I've got a few questions here. I think lots of questions and lots of comments actually. So I think we'll just dive right in. So Bella Paulin, who I think was around last week, I think she was in the conversation with last week. She starts off, she's going to start us off here by saying, I am really interested in the children's photography project. I've seen the photographs of children and Frankie's book. Are the children's photographs, those by them, in the archive? And conveniently, maybe this is selfish that I just opened up with a question that maybe I should answer. I don't know. But I will also hand it over to Aleister, because although I manage the collection, the Frankie Raffles Archive is about 40,000 images strong. I have not seen them all, as much as I would love to see all the million photographs we have in our collection. I haven't. I sort of help facilitate the research, so others can probably chime in here if they want to answer after me. But there is some work by the children in the collection. There's not a lot of it. And we have just finished a 2-year cataloging project. Wei Tian, who Catherine mentioned earlier, he's just finished a 2-year cataloging project with us. But of course, not everything is cataloged or digitized, but we do have some organization of it and some understanding of it. So there is some work in there, but I would imagine that a lot of these students would have taken, the young people would have taken that work home with them. So I don't know if Aleister, if you want to jump in and answer that one as well, or if anyone else.
I think that there are sample books, and for example, one of the things was life stories. So the children were encouraged to make books using photographs to tell a story that came out of perhaps going to visit someone or coming to school, and I think that there are examples of those. I don't know whether, you know, Sandy or Jane, who were featured in the photographs I used of the Pinewood School project, might remember whether the children or carers took the books home. Certainly there's enough to get a flavour of it, and certainly in We Can Take Pictures and a second booklet, Frankie and others wrote the We Can Take Pictures was commissioned by CSB, so that there's enough documentation to really get an understanding of what the objectives were.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Aleister. Did anyone else want to chime in? We can move on. Actually, before I move on to the next question / comment, if any of you have questions for each other as well, you'll be welcome to voice those. You can jump in at any point with those. But I just want to pull up a question here from Paul Curry. It's more of a comment, but I'm going to follow it on with a question. He said, I saw the NHS photos around NHS premises in Lothian many years ago. They really captured the working lives of NHS workers and the professional and support role. It's a great archive. And of course, at this time, it's really important to think about that kind of work as well. But do any of you have any comments on her NHS work? If any of you guys have taken a close look at this, or is this something that you've not looked too closely at? Worthy of further research, perhaps. Anyways, thank you, Paul, for that comment. Aleister, did you want to jump in?
I'm not absolutely sure where they went. They were in Deaconess Hospital, the final exhibition that I saw, which would, and I think that premise is no longer NHS property. I don't know. Someone might know. And I remember talking to Wendy, who was doing an audit of the artworks held by the NHS, and I suspect that in some cupboard, in some modern part of the NHS, there may be some photographs. It would be really interesting to hunt down that and see if they'd be prepared to put them at St Andrews so that they can be accessed.
Could I make a suggestion?
Sorry, go on, Alicia.
Arabella Harvey, who's on the board at Street Level, commissions a lot of artists and photographers to work with NHS. So maybe that's something that Arabella might want to pick up. It's just in my head, but just in case we could make that connection. Hi, Arabella, and I know you're very busy, so sorry for passing extra work to you, but hopefully
giving her extra work. No, this is great. I mean, as a photographic curator and collections manager, I know that there's a lot of very interesting stuff hidden in cupboards and closets and attics and whatnot. So yeah, we'll have to get a look out for those. Sort of on that topic, actually, question that I have for each of you is, are there any parts of the collection that aren't researched and seen? There are certain areas over the last couple of years that have sort of come more to light, but is there anything that you've seen in your access, either Catherine or Jenny specifically, in your access of the collection that you've kind of looked at and said, oh yes, this requires more research, more study? Are there any areas that you want to highlight here, as we have a captive audience of potential researchers? Feel free to jump in if you have an answer to that.
I think Catherine could probably comment on that better than me. I think because I had a short time in the archive on the visit, it became very focused on those kind of bodies of work. So Catherine's probably spent kind of more time looking at the different aspects.
I was very strict with time, wasn't I? I'm very sorry, Jenny. Well, you are welcome back anytime to come look at more of the collection. Catherine, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge collection. You've touched on this, Rachel. It's massive, and I think the answer is that there's elements of it still to be explored, but that even the projects that have been shown, we still don't know the full extent of them and the full kind of ramifications of them. So, you know, even the kind of zero tolerance material that I've seen in the archive, I think we've mentioned that's probably Franki's best known work, but there's so much in there. There's so many notes, there's pages and pages, there's notebooks that give such a vivid sense of the number of meetings that she went to, the huge amount of conversations that she had. There's also some interesting links between, it's clear, or it seems to be becoming clear from listening to some of the interviews that she did around the Lot's Wife project that Aleister was mentioning at the end of his talk, that she was looking at gender-based violence as part of that project. And so there were connections between that project and zero tolerance as well. So there's also connections to be made between the different parts of the archive. And that also goes back to the question about the NHS images, in that I think again, you can actually detect a long-standing concern with healthcare and with support systems going back to Let You Understand. There were lots of images in that, particularly in laundries. There's incredible images of the labor that's going on in terms of cleaning all of the kind of the laundry material, that you get this real sense of the support structures within the support structure. So that for me is a fascinating part of her work. I
think that it's the connections between everything. It's the personal is political. There's no barrier between life and her work, and that Sarah sums that up in the introduction to the booklet produced for the exhibition. I remember, I can't think that I've seen it recently, but Wei Tian pointed out to me one of the earliest photographs that Frankie took internationally was on a trip to Zimbabwe in September 1983, where she went and photographed a women's health centre, a women's health project. And so, from the very start, we see the development of strands that continue. Of course, what's interesting, and Catherine's pointed it out, is it's unfiltered. Of course, lots of photographers have their work in archive, and it's often split between several archives. And often they've had chance to think carefully about what notes they're going to show and what contact sheets they're going to leave out and what prints they're going to use. Frankie didn't do that. She was in the middle of the biggest, most ambitious project. And so we have everything. And I think that it's fantastic that in all the research that's come out has been an understanding of the depth of the work that was being created. And I'm amazed at that, really.
Yeah, that's a really good point. From an archival point of view, looking at a collection, an artist's, a photographer's collection as an entire entity, not, as you say, filtered. It's not just the selection of 20 prints that they wanted to show on a wall at any one time. Having the entire collection of 40,000 negatives is really important, especially for us at a university level, at an institution where we want to undergo that research and we want to facilitate that research. It's very important for us to have that unfiltered collection accessible to anybody. And it's not just students, it's general public, curators, anyone who's interested in the topic can come in, book a space in our reading room and come in and look at it. And that for me is a very important part of our job within archives and within greater collections. We're quickly sort of running out of time here, but I do have one question for Aleister, and I'm also curious about this, so I'm interjecting it. What was your abiding memory of Frankie, both as an artist and also as a friend?
Well, she was able to be friends with everyone. Clearly, I think Evelyn Gillen in the interview that we did talking about her talked about how Frankie, was a Jewish lesbian mother, photographer, Marxist, all these different isms, all these different identities, but she was the same with everyone. And she was able to work with people across the board in the Scottish context of taking documentary photographs across Scotland, and in the international places that she went with. And she was always presented herself. There was no artifice there, and there was no barrier between the personal and the political. That, I think, is a really key thing, that her work was her life and her life was her work. And she was great fun. And my abiding memory is of endless cups of coffee and endless cigarettes.
Fantastic. That's a wonderful image to leave us on. Thank you. Right, so as we are wrapping up, there are lots of comments coming in, wonderful comments from the public about how fantastic your talks are, but also her work, and we'll get to a wrap up later, but there is one here actually. Sorry, I'm trying to do this ad hoc. That we have got one comment here, which I think is a really nice way to wrap up. It was just sent to me. It was sent to Malcolm, I think, earlier, but he's forwarded this through, and I think it's a nice way to pull everything together. It's from Marianne Kennedy, and she couldn't be here tonight, but they're really nice words to end on, so I'm just going to read it. And I'm quoting Marianne Kennedy here. She says, "In the early stages of establishing photography workshop and portfolio gallery, Gloria, Jane, and I met with Frankie at her house to discuss potential involvement. We all knew each other. Me through Napier, Gloria and Jane were and had been at Stills. This must have been in 87 or early 88 as we opened portfolio in August of 1988. Frankie was supportive, but as you can see from her timeline, she was juggling a growing number of projects. So in the end, it was just 3 of us. As she was traveling through Russia, Israel, showing at Stills, Glasgow, launching the Zero Tolerance campaign, between the opening of portfolio in August of 88 and her death in 94, there was no time for full further collaboration. Her death was an immense shock and a great loss." And so we thank Marianne for that, for those notes to end on. So if you would like to see more of Frankie's work, I think some links have been shared throughout the talk, both to the Frankie Raffles Archive website, to the collections website, and various other places online. But there are, of course, upcoming exhibitions. And Catherine mentioned one earlier at the Glasgow Women's Library, which opens in August, and that's when she's currently working on. But additionally, as part of the Glasgow International Festival, Chapter 13 will be hosting an exhibition called The Other Half at the Pearce Institute, which includes some of Frankie's photos, as they tell the story of women's industrial work in Govan, drawing on themes of feminist economies. And of course, it is a quite poetic way, as I think if you were paying attention and reading all the slides, Aleister showed an exhibition poster where Frankie had exhibited at the Pearce Institute in 1990. So it's quite a nice way to re-show the work there. So we thank them for putting on that exhibition. And of course, I mentioned earlier, Nikki Bird's exhibition at street level will be closing June 6th. And there's 2 more events coming up in conjunction with that. A talk of the Margaret Watkins collection and Margaret's photographs, which is a week tonight, and the closing seminar with Nikki Bird on Saturday. More of that information is on street level website. So I cannot sign off, obviously, without giving a great list of thanks to our fabulous speakers tonight, Aleister, Jenny, Catherine, and Alicia. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your words. It was really important and moving to hear from the start of Frankie's work all the way up to ongoing influences she has. That's a lovely line that we've gone through tonight. And working behind the scenes, feeding me all these questions and keeping us all connected. John over at Street Level, thank you very much. And of course, Malcolm Dixon and the entire team at Street Level PhotoWorks. Thank you very much to Malcolm for proposing this evening's set of talks and hosting us tonight. And thank you all for coming.